Hey everyone, I'm Max, Director of Agent Product at Decagon. At Decagon, we build AI agents for customer support. And so thought it was worthwhile today for us to hone in on the AI port of the AI agents. One of the things we've seen as we've been working with customers for the last few years is that LLMs from places like Anthropic and OpenAI have driven huge stepwise changes across tons of functions. Obviously, we work very closely with CX, but one of the organizations that we've been spending more time with recently are product managers, which is why today super excited to be met and joined by Bihan, who is our core product lead. Bihan, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Excited to be here.
So Bihan, maybe before we jump into the questions, obviously excited to talk to you about how you see the product space evolving, how AI agents is obviously kind of transforming you and your role. Maybe useful though for the folks at home, brief introduction on you, where you're coming from, kind of how you landed at Decagon in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. Hey everyone, I'm Bihan. I lead our core product team here at Decagon. Joined Decagon as the first kind of core PM. Prior to Decagon, spent 4 years building in GenAI at Scale AI and did my undergrad and my master's at Stanford. So very excited to kind of talk about how product and CX has evolved over the past few years in my mind and where we see the industry going.
So maybe one good place to start, right? Our team is the Agent PM team. You guys are the product team. A question I get all the time is maybe the distinction between those two functions. How do you see kind of product bifurcating out on this per agent basis and this core basis? Maybe how are our teams working together? Maybe we can start there and we can dive in a little bit more specific.
That's a great question. Also a question that I get all the time. I think the way that I see it is breadth versus depth. I think for the core product team, we are focusing on building out the core platform for building out the AI agent. Mm-hmm. So enabling both the agent PMs as well as the customers to collaborate within the platform to build out agents that are very specific to their companies.
Sure.
And then how I see the Agent PM team working closely with our team is using all of the tools and the products that we're building to build the best product for each of their companies that they're working with.
Yeah, I think it's a really good analogy, right? Folks on our team are going as deep as possible, trying to get business context on people and leveraging the tools that we're building alongside customers for our business, but also the tools that you're working on and spending time with our team on. I think before we skate too far into the future though, and talking about kind of this interesting bifurcation that's happening in the product world, maybe let's start a little bit in the past, right? So our business is largely focused on CX, right? The support organization, that is the use case that Decagon is really optimized for. And one of the things I think has been really interesting in working with organizations like Hertz Rental Car, like Duolingo, like Eventbrite, is kind of understanding how product in the world that you do interplays with CX. Obviously, this has been changing quite a bit in the world of Gen AI. Maybe before we jump into the future, we could start a little bit in the past. Historically, how did you and I guess product managers in general kind of interact with CX teams? What did that overlap look like?
I think in the past, the overlap between product and CX teams at most orgs that I've seen or had folks work at was quite limited. Sure. I think there was a very large organizational gap between the CX orgs and product and EPD orgs. Yeah. And so what that would result in is product managers and EPD teams would launch new features, launch new products, but maybe not, tell the support team or give them a heads up or provide them the right enablement to handle the influx of support questions and inquiries around those launches. Sure. And so what that results in is a large influx of these support tickets, a lot of conversations that these live support agents may not be able to handle or be equipped to respond to, which leads to higher contact rates, higher ticket volume, but also lower NPS and CSAT.
So essentially what you're saying, right, is that you have this product organization that's driving the roadmap of what we're shipping forward. And to some degree, it's almost disconnected from the organization that has the best sense of what people actually want and what they want to improve in the product. Mm-hmm.
And I think another sort of result of this is in the past, a lot of this triage and product improvement that was coming from the support org was very, very reactionary.
Sure.
And so what would happen in a lot of organizations was support teams would be the best source of what the customers are saying. Right. They have the direct conversations that these users are having and their biggest complaints. These users also might be a really good source of identifying product feature requests. But these would be very often just not flagged to the product team or take weeks or even months to bubble up to the product team for them to fix.
It makes a ton of sense, right? When you think about really large scale organizations, enterprise grade companies like the ones we're working with, there's just a lot of people in the loop. And so it can be really difficult, I feel like, to get your opinion heard on anything, regardless of if it could drive an actual impact to the product or not. And then, of course, prioritizing it after the fact is difficult. I think a reasonable starting place, at the work that you did at Scale and at other organizations you've seen from talking to folks in the industry, of course, there was some progress that's been made towards this. It's an acute pain point. Historically, what were the tools, what were the processes that people tried to use to bridge the gap, right? Because I think no product manager who's listening to this is going to be surprised by what you're saying, but I imagine everyone historically has had some kind of playbook by way they've tried to fix this problem.
How I've seen it work well in the past, sort of pre-Gen AI, is having some sort of regular cadence or very clear touch points with the support leads. So each product team usually has a product area where they're experts in, and then how I've seen it work in the past is in support orgs, there will be support specialists who are very deep in knowledge about that product surface area. And so having some regular touch point, maybe weekly, bi-weekly, where the product manager is meeting with that support lead, and that support lead is helping surface the top themes that they're seeing or the top tickets that they're receiving, has been super helpful. And in terms of building empathy for those users and also taking that input and using that to prioritize items on the roadmap or things to fix in the bug backlog, what I've found really helpful is having the product team and the engineers who are working on the features actually read those support tickets. You know, it doesn't have to be a large time commitment. Even just spending 30 minutes a week reading through 50 conversations really opens people's eyes to how people are interacting with the product.
But I guess, like, how do you pick in let's say in the old world, right? How do you pick the 50 conversations that you should read, right? I think one of the things that I think a lot about in some of the previous roles I've worked in, right? I've worked in support sort of frontline, is the volume of work that you are supporting can make it really difficult to sort of aggregate down, right? And so there's a lot of trust, of course, on the CX teams, which are, you know, very competent in managing and organizing their ticket volumes. But how do you figure out how to discern conversations in this kind of like old world? Are you just grabbing the top 50, or what was your kind of tactic to try and hone in on this before maybe a Gen AI context?
Yeah, good question. So I think in the pre-Gen AI world, product teams were very reliant on just kind of old school models to correctly tag or categorize or route these conversations coming in. And then we would have these sort of bulky, outdated dashboards or Excel spreadsheets where we were seeing the trend lines over time, the contact rates, and then every week maybe we would pick one specific category to deep dive into to understand the key themes there. And what would drive that is normally, you know, did this trend line move up or down? Did the percent of contacts in a particular category increase? Or did we see a huge drop in CSAT or MPS in one of these buckets? But you're right. I think because this was pre-Gen AI, we did not have as powerful, you know, voice of the customer understanding or ability to drill down very deep into these conversations to pinpoint the best conversations to actually look into.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I think folks have been kind of circling around what you're describing for a pretty long time. When I worked back at, you know, relatively large publicly traded tech company, Microsoft, earlier in my career, right? We leveraged a whole bunch of tools to try and structure this data in a bunch of different ways, right? We had an internal dashboard where folks could kind of upvote conversations and topics and features that they wanted. We had per conversation or per week, like a synthesis of the primary topics. I feel like to some degree that had to have been somewhat useful, I guess, right? I mean, from your end, you'd be getting these reports, you'd be getting these dashboards. How historically would you have taken this content and turned it into things for your roadmap? Are you just looking at the top pain points and saying, I should resolve these? I guess I want to understand a little more about what you were doing with this, let's call it like relatively disparate data.
What we would see is, you know, if we saw a bug that came up pretty commonly, we would then go and like dog through that particular flow. We would try to reproduce the issue and then work with a support lead who had been talking to that user. Sometimes we would actually go and talk to those users themselves to get closer to the problem. But the issue is a lot of the times these messages and conversations are quite delayed. And so by the time they're reaching the product team, maybe the bug has already been fixed. Maybe the issue isn't actually the highest like ROI item to be pursuing. And so it would be really hard to actually prioritize and tackle problems immediately after they occurred.
It's really interesting, right? Because I think I've seen tons of organizations talk about the role of support and where they should live. I've worked in organizations in the past where support rolls up under product, based, I think, a lot on the insights that you're sharing, that the voice of the customer is effectively the lifeblood of what it is we're shipping. I've also seen folks build out their own standalone organizations, put this under finance or operations, and seeing support almost as a sort of structural call center. It feels like there's kind of a broad, or cost center rather than call center, excuse me. There's like a broad approach to where CX should live within organizations. It sounds like from what you're saying though, like it's actually quite effective to put it as close to the builders as possible, largely because that's really what's informing what you're building day to day.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with that.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense as I think about how we've been building our organization at Decagon too, not to skate too far ahead, right? You think about the distinction between an agent PM and a sort of core product PM. It creates a really nice relationship between the two folks when you have somebody who is so deep in the weeds in shipping features with customers that they really acutely understand the pain points, while at the same time having somebody else who can kind of disambiguate, let's call it like a very nuanced depth of situation to say at a broad level, this is probably something we need to invest in, whether that's analytics and A/B testing, which is something I know your team has released recently, or automated QA through our Watchtower product. It's really interesting to see what happens when you actually build these two organizations much closer to one another than ideally kind of maybe a little bit farther away than they would like to be. I think one of the things that's interesting though is as these companies scale, it can be quite hard to keep that relationship quite as tight, even if folks are within the same orbit and kind of range. Do you have any tips for maybe folks either on the product or the CX side to tighten those relationships and build them? I mean, regardless of what Gen AI has done and obviously ways that we can improve and Decagon's role in that, I think there's probably got to be some best practices that you've done from your side just to try and actually discern what really matters from the dashboards and the data you were talking about.
Yeah, for sure. I think what's really important, like you mentioned, is having these orgs as close together as possible and having very, very frequent touch points between them, whether that be just having them sit next to each other in an office or having a shared Slack channel where people can drop in exactly what they're hearing from their customers directly from the source.
Sure.
And then having the core product team be able to go in and kind of categorize and triage everything that they're hearing from the agent PM team.
Sure.
And so I think for us, at Decagon, I think that's worked really well. I think for our teams, we're able to have a very, very close touch point to the source of all of the customer feedback and the product feedback.
Right.
And I think that's enabled us to build a product that scales for all of our customers instead of building one-off point solutions for each of them.
Well, let's dig in on that a little bit more because I have been in the Slack channels where we're sharing feedback within your team and it is coming at high volume. Imagine, right, some of the organizations we're working with have tens of thousands of employees with maybe thousands of support agents. How are you gleaning from the volume of things, what's happening, what matters, right? I mean, to some degree, this is the elusive product sense or intuition that I think everyone's always evaluating for when they're looking for folks who kind of guide their roadmap. Mm-hmm. Do you have any tips, I guess, just in general for product leaders who are, as they're getting closer and closer to CX organizations, especially through Gen AI, which we'll touch about in a minute, how they can kind of figure out what matters and what doesn't matter?
So I think there's a lot of tactical items that we can do around product feature intake.
Yeah.
So one thing that works really well for us is for these feature requests, customer feedback, bugs that folks are posting, having very clear different product segments that these fall into,
Sure.
and then having it very clear which customers are asking for what or flagging what, and the reason that they're asking for it. So I think even going beyond or a layer deeper than the feature request or the bug itself, understanding the workflow that it enables or is blocking
Sure.
is really critical for the product team. Because then there might be 10 customers asking for 10 different features, but it could all be mapping to the same pain point or the key workflow.
Yeah.
And understanding the workflow behind the ask has been critical in helping us prioritize what to focus on.
It makes a ton of sense when our team is thinking about building AI agents, right? I think in reality there are a couple core competencies or core buckets that make a good agent build or really kind of build this concept of what I'm starting to call like an agent PRD to some degree. Right, obviously the ability to bring a human into the loop, to have those guardrails, to do the experimentation, some of the QA, some of the work that your team has been shipping recently. I think it makes a ton of sense to sort of categorize and organize them. And I think it actually is a nice segue into, I guess, what you're seeing now. Obviously, we've seen some stepwise changes, not just in the CX org more broadly, as we have LLMs providing more flexible, sort of automated responses to users to help them resolve their problems. But obviously, I'm sure the nature of the work has changed. I mean, you and I are within the same function, doing sort of separate roles in terms of breadth and depth. We're working with customers whose CX orgs are now moving from sort of folks who are kind of trying to push away tickets to automated kind of like scalable data sources. What has changed between CX and product and the way they collaborate and what you're seeing over the course of the last couple of years with the advent of Gen AI?
Great question. I think with Gen AI, that really has unlocked a new intelligence layer of voice of the customer analytics,
Sure.
as well as proactive suggestions and closing the loop over time. And so what I mean by that is, in terms of understanding the intents and kind of motivations behind each customer that's writing in has become a lot easier with LLMs.
Why is that? Just out of curiosity.
So LLMs just fundamentally are able to understand, human text very well.
Yeah.
It's able to summarize conversations that are super long and just provide the best sort of short information that a human needs to understand what's going on. And so what that results in is the ability for teams to understand very, very quickly, hey, like over the last week, what were the top kind of intents that were driving deflection up? Or what are the top intents that are driving CSAT down? And how is that changing over time?
So in your mind, essentially the real advent for product teams are that these models are so effective at understanding what people are talking about, and there is no more unstructured data than human conversation, right? And sort of categorizing and bucking that. And so it's almost like the exercise you were doing before with your dashboarding and otherwise. But I guess, is it more discernible? Help me understand the gap between maybe what you were seeing before in your weekly syncs, in your sort of large dashboards, in your like kind of ticket and leaderboards and all the other structures, and then what it is you're getting now from this voice of customer platform. Is it just that the identification's more accurate, or help me understand that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I'll walk through maybe a typical workflow before versus after. I think before, let's say you're getting 100,000 conversations a week. Just in terms of pure volume, it's impossible to understand deeply what's going on in all of that. There's a lot of noise, and it's hard to filter out the signal from the noise.
Yep.
And so product teams were a little bit more blind and had to hope that in their QA batch of tickets that they might have that one nugget of information.
Yeah.
But now with Gen AI, and this has also been why we've built out a lot of our kind of automatic QA products, is it helps you find that needle in the haystack and figure out where the top ROI conversations to look at is.
Sure.
And so, for example, now with our Watchtower product, we're able to have 24/7 like online LLM reviewing all of these conversations for key things that we care about.
Yeah.
For example, if we care about bug reports, if we care about upsell opportunities, we can bring in different groups of people from different parts of the company who have different things that they care about in these conversations and provide these custom reports and conversations for them to review. So that just helps teams, not just product teams, but all teams be much more targeted in what they're reviewing and seeing, and find the most valuable voice of the customer.
One thing that I've noticed quite a bit in a lot of the agent builds that I've done with some of the companies we mentioned earlier is actually that the things that the CX teams are shipping with AI agents are actually much closer to product now than maybe they were as well. So of course there's this reactive component of where we were in the past where there's insights, there's voice of the customer. It's just much easier for us to sort through that. But we're actually finding when we're sort of boots on the ground with folks here that product teams are pretty deeply involved in building AI agents for CX organizations, right? Because there is a technical component there, right? Obviously, we have our sort of agent operating procedures. How do you see the role of product kind of transforming as part of being a part of this like building experience, I guess, right? I'm seeing these folks as part of these core project teams, engineering as an extension of product as well. How is product getting involved in this kind of agent building process where maybe before they're a little bit more reactive?
Yeah, so I think the way that I see a lot of product folks getting involved now is both leveraging a lot of their subject matter expertise in crafting these agent operating procedures, because they have a very strong intuition to here are the features that are within this product, here's how they should interact with a specific type of user, and lean into a lot of the conversational design of what their users should have as an experience when interacting with that product. So I think number one is that agent operating procedure writing and conversational design. And then I think two, because we've built out a lot of this A/B testing and experimentation platform within our product, people are able to iterate and test their ideas much more quickly.
Sure.
So instead of having to decide and debate, hey, like I have these 3 ideas, like which one should we go with? We can actually just test all of these ideas very quickly and make a more data-driven decision, which ties more into kind of traditional product management.
Yeah, I think it's worth clarifying for folks at home too, when it comes to these agent operating procedures or AOPs, right? One of the kind of stakes in the ground that Decagon is making is this idea that a good AI agent is a combination of natural language and code, right? And I actually think AOPs are a perfect microcosm of what's changed in the product org and the CX org kind of relationship over time, right? Mm-hmm. The way that we are kind of talking about building workflows in our AI agents, right, are working with CX teams to take that natural language and sort of write down the step-by-step procedures that maybe a human agent would follow in resolving a user's issue. While at the same time, when it comes to actually building and integrating with those systems, using the determinism of an API endpoint of code to actually take the actions. And so what you end up getting is this really interesting model where you can have, let's call it non-technical business users, kind of draft up the general guidance of the AI agent, and then the technical teams lean really heavily into developing the kind of core functionality from a code perspective, whether that's in their own code base or obviously in the Decagon platform that you and your team are building. And so it almost feels like, to me, based on what you're saying, these AOPs are kind of like the classic example of how these teams are collaborating like a little more closely, whereas before, data came in from the CX org, it was filtered, discerned to the product team who'd take it away and build something with it. Now it feels to some degree like maybe there's like a little bit more closeness. Does that kind of align with what you're seeing on your side?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the AOP building and collaboration between support and product in crafting those conversations is definitely one huge part. And then sort of after the fact, after these AOPs have been launched into the agent and are interacting with millions of end users, having that post-conversation analysis has been really helpful in helping product teams close the loop and iterate on those AOPs over time. Because now we can see all these conversations where the user may have interacted with this AOP,
sure.
But no AOP is perfect from the beginning. There's probably some edge cases that you need to improve upon over time. And with Gen AI and LLMs, you're able to quickly identify those gaps, and then hill climb to understand how to make your agent better.
Sure, I know this is something you and your team are spending a lot of time on, right? Because it's not just about, like you're saying, how do we build and configure the AI agent? It's also, how do we test it? How do we improve it? Mm-hmm. I think one conversation we've been having internally at Decagon quite a bit that I found really compelling is this idea that support and really deflecting tickets and containing tickets is kind of a relic of like a historical context in that, obviously you want to help resolve people's issues, but you're kind of considering how many people you have available to do that. I think where I'm really clearly seeing this head, especially with customers who've been partnering with us for quite a while now, is we have a relatively stable way through their AI agent to resolve people's problems who are coming in. How do we take that a step further? How do we go proactive and sort of outbound out, right? How do we turn this into revenue generation? That is the type of experience that I think a lot of this voice of the customer work that you're talking about can be really helpful on, right? Because as you have an increasingly large kind of corpus of conversation data, probably becomes a little bit easier for you as a product manager to say, what do I do next, right? Like, let me query against this in a way that maybe wasn't possible for LLMs.
That's a really great point. I think in terms of proactive and revenue generating use cases, that is where we're seeing a lot of the most sort of sophisticated customers start heading towards after they've built out a lot of their core agent functionality. And you're right, because we have all this conversation data and we can understand for a particular user when we hone in on them, their support history or their history of writing in or calling in across different channels, we can start to build up these ideal sort of user journeys, or we can understand more deeply these user profiles of people that are coming in and understand, hey, like this person had called in 3 times last week to reset their password, and then this week we actually saw them, in the app. So we probably assume that they had their issue resolved. So building up that understanding of users' interactions and then using that to predict, how to handle conversation with them next, what they might be predisposed to buy or explore within the product has been super helpful for all of our customers.
So I think we've landed on these 2 buckets, right? We have products' increasing role in the development of AI agents as sort of a product itself for the function of support, and then obviously the voice of the customer piece, which is a little bit more discernible through Gen AI and through being able to prompt against your sort of context and your conversation history. Let's say I'm a PM, Max Lowenthal PM, circa 2018 or 2017, right back when I worked at a larger organization. And I'm listening to a conversation like this and I'm saying, okay, cool, Max, Bihan, I can be closer to building AI agents. I guess I can be closer to like leveraging the data, but those are very like ephemeral concepts. If you're a PM listening into this, I guess regardless of tenure, what are the steps that you're taking outside of potentially partnering with Decagon, of course, to try and leverage these types of improvements that you're seeing stepwise change from LLMs? What should folks be doing? Best practices, resources, products? What is really catching your eye?
Besides partnering with Decagon, sure, I think what product managers can be doing as an immediate step is just reviewing support tickets and then applying AI to those support tickets to understand, where are the top areas of focus? How can I proactively, reach out and like support these folks who are, writing in? By the time a member is writing in, they're already either quite frustrated or there's been a lot of, activation energy to get to that point. Yeah. And so all of these support conversations are just a gold mine for product teams, and integrating, reviewing these conversations into your weekly, daily routine, and then having AI help you synthesize and organize through these conversations is the highest leverage thing I think it
Got it. So just doing what people were doing before, but just synthesizing data in a more straightforward way.
And I think using this to also close the feedback loops with the support teams. Yeah. And so in terms of product launches, right? You want to, once you've started reading some of these conversations and building up an intuition around what people are saying. One thing that I think a lot of PMs notice is that they need to be much more proactive in pushing information towards the support team. So before they even release a feature, they should proactively think, hey, like, I'm a new user, I'm interacting with this feature, I don't know what's going on, or I run into a bug, I'm gonna write into support. Sure. Is that support team enabled to help resolve that issue or answer those questions? And especially now with AI, as you're building out your PRDs or as you're building out the products, just having a section where you're thinking about how is the support team going to handle this. That might look like writing a Help Center article or providing a one-pager to the support team on how to resolve these issues goes a long way.
Well, it's nice, right? Because if it's easier and you can spend less time analyzing the data, then you can just do more stuff with that data, right? Like enable the support teams. I would say one of the things that I've noticed in how this partnership has kind of improved between product and CX and the organizations that myself and my team are pretty closely embedded in is that it just gives CX and the voice of the customer a lot more autonomy, right? And so for any CX folks that are potentially listening as well, I think one of the best practices that I've discerned is it's actually good to let these more technical and more product-oriented folks into the conversation, right? You've always kind of sat on this almost like gold mine of ways that folks can be improving their businesses and trying to serve folks better. And so leaning into the fact that Gen AI makes it a little bit easier for your voice to be heard, those really frustrating ticket volumes that came in. I was a support agent way back in the day. Some ticket topics came in, I was like, why have we not fixed this yet, right? I think to some degree, there's quite a bit of leverage that CX folks can garner, not only, of course, from like a headcount ROI perspective, but also from a just happiness and overall CSAT perspective by being able to do the same type of analysis that PMs are doing, right? What are the major topics and tickets that we need to automate? How can we be optimizing our human support flows, our SOPs, our training, our onboarding, when maybe an AI conversation does need to go to a person, right? To make that a little bit more effective. I think it's kind of a two-way street there overall.
And I like what you said about leverage. I think in terms of the sort of workflows that I've seen in the past, a lot of the times when support would flag issues to the product team, it'd be a one-off investigation. It's not clear the impact of this issue or the distribution. But now with Gen AI, it's much easier to attribute, hey, like I found this issue, where else is it happening? And provide an ROI number for the team to help prioritize.
And that's great, right? Because ultimately, if I'm a CX leader, I'm thinking about how do I buy my team leverage so that we can support more people, increase their overall happiness, their satisfaction. If we can get folks who can actually solve the problem, CX and rather product leaders like yourself, to ship the core features that wipe away a huge swath of issues that users are writing in about, that just feels like a win-win, right? I think you just got to make sure that you're building the right stuff. And it sounds like from what you're saying, Gen AI has just been a huge advent in making sure that you can focus on the right topics.
Yeah, okay. I think it's going to be a key in turning these CX teams from focusing on reducing costs to actually focusing on the growth of the company.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the future. Looking ahead, what does this relationship look like for you in your mind with product and CX? How are you thinking about with your peers and other folks? We have more data, we're more embedded in this process. How should PMs be thinking about the relationships that they have with kind of CX and the support organization in general?
Yeah, so I think going forward, as you handle and be more proactive about all of these tickets coming in, CX leaders and product leaders should start becoming more partners in developing and co-developing this roadmap on what we should be building. I think CX leaders have a very deep understanding, and they can probably tell you off the bat, what are the top 10 issues in your product? And then as you fix those, they are also going to be hearing the voice of the customer and seeing, what are people asking for?
Yep.
So they're going to be a really, really valuable resource for product leaders to understand, what should I be building next? What is going to make our customer the happiest?
Sure.
And what is the volume associated with each of those? And so taking that understanding and then having the product leader work very closely with the engineering team and the design team and providing that context to them helps everyone develop better products.
So your take is really get these support orgs closer to the product organizations, even if they're in the same kind of vertical, right? It's like, how do we, now that the data is even easier to discern, how do we get these folks constantly giving us their opinion on a regular basis and kind of pulling them into the development process? Because ideally, you've kind of been able, if I'm interpreting your commentary right, to like strip away all of the noise and the ineffectiveness because you're better at sort of analyzing, and then ideally product is obviously involved in building the agents themselves. You're saying close the gap.
Exactly, yeah. Close the gap between support and product. And these support people are the closest layer to your customers. So of course, keep talking to your customers, and these support people will also be able to provide a good source of the best people to talk to as well.
I think, Bihan, we were talking about two kind of core components of building the AI agent, right? One is this historical analytics piece that obviously LLMs have given us this stepwise change for, the things you're talking about in the past where you're hosting these meetings and these dashboards. The other one we haven't spent as much time talking about is the agent development process. So we mentioned AOPs a couple times throughout our conversation. What is the role of product and how close they need to be to support in actually building these agents and taking them live kind of from 0 to 1 rather than the continuous improvement from call it like 1 to 1,000?
I think historically what would happen is these support agents or support leaders would take their best shot at building these standard operating procedures for their live agents.
Sure.
And a lot of them are the folks who are building these agent operating procedures in our platform. Yeah. And where I think product can play a larger role is being super involved and heavily kind of partnering with the support leaders and building out those agent operating procedures because they are these subject matter experts on the nuances in the product. Yeah. And so generally, as a product manager, when you're writing an agent operating procedure along with a support leader for a flow that touches your product, you're going to have the best intuition as to what types of users or what qualities of these users are going to cause them to run into certain edge cases in your product. Sure. For example, if your customer has been a longtime valued member, like maybe they actually have a different level of access to your product than others. And you can help the support organization craft that agent operating procedure to take those nuances into account.
Got it. So your take is really, if I'm discerning correctly, is essentially bring that knowledge of the product and like the user interface to some degree in partnership with the support people who really know what people are talking about, right? And you can kind of together craft these AOPs, these agent operating procedure kind of workflows to help make sure that you have an AI agent that not only actually solves someone's problem, i.e. the support side of things, but also does so in a way that's actually useful to them, right? In a way that's kind of representative of the way they're going to interact with the product, whether that's through obviously sort of like an API endpoint or even just a good understanding of kind of the steps that need to happen to take somebody from sort of A to B in a relatively complex workflow.
Yep.
What do you think are going to be the challenges in getting there, right? You've worked at scaled organizations now, obviously. You've worked at mid-stage startups as well. What is going to be the biggest gap, particularly for these enterprise-grade companies, in closing the difference? Is it going to be setting up and building those AI agents? Is it going to be finding the right solution to help actually leverage AI to discern some of the things that you're talking about? What's kind of the disconnect if someone is essentially like, great, I'm happy to listen to this conversation. What do I do? What do you think are the big challenges that are there?
I think the biggest challenge that I see is, especially because building becomes so much faster with AI, people have many more ideas. And it becomes much more harder to prioritize which ideas to focus on. Sure. Because everyone can have a lot of great ideas and no one knows the exact impact. And so I think that's where a lot of the experimentation and constant iteration comes into play. I think these teams, as they're working closer together, need to heavily lean into experimentation to understand and test their hypotheses very quickly, so they don't spend a lot of time wasted on pursuing different dead ends.
So your take is the speed at which we're moving is just so much faster than before. Lean into that to some degree.
Yeah.
Regardless of kind of the way that you do that. I think it makes a ton of sense. I guess maybe a closing thought here. You're someone listening, you're at a product org. they want the best piece of advice. Bihan from 5 years ago, pre-Decagon, is listening to this conversation. What is that one piece of advice that you give to product organizations, to product leaders, technical leaders, to level up their kind of partnership with their CX organizations?
I think the main piece of advice I would give is, I think for product folks, traditionally, you want to present a very polished sort of PRD or product spec, or have your opinion fully formed.
Sure.
And I think we need to start moving more away from that. I think product teams need to be okay with being wrong, and being more okay with having a lot of opinions, but not strongly held.
Sure.
And then taking that and working very closely with the support team to combine those opinions, figure out what are the top kind of areas they want to investigate in, and co-develop and co-test those.
Got it. So just move faster, right? I mean, that's really what I think I'm hearing in kind of summary from our conversation is really product organizations can be so much more embedded in developing the AI agents now as part of this agent operating procedure, kind of idea that we've built here, but also more broadly. And then it's so much easier for them to discern the data. If you're cutting away all of the time, I think the advice that I sense to glean from you across our conversation is this is just a stepwise change in the level of productivity that CX agents can have in terms of their ability to serve people at scale, but also product leaders can have in their ability to discern what folks need. And so leaning into that speed, cutting away maybe all of the extra fluff in service of driving some impact is quite helpful.
Because the building time has been reduced so much, it is less costly to be a little bit wrong.
Sure.
And so I think product leaders should just lean into that and understand that, it's okay to be wrong. You should have 10 opinions, test all of them, double down on the things that work.
So here's a question for you, maybe a bit off topic, but curious for your take then. If I'm a product leader, how do I decide what I should be moving really quickly on internally and leveraging my limited resources versus maybe coming and having a conversation with somebody like a Decagon about it?
I think in terms of, internal builds versus like working with Decagon, I think what we specialize in is handling these like very, very complex workflows.
Sure.
And so if you have a lot of these complex workflows and they're generally high volume, I think working with a partner like Decagon can help you up-level that whole experience versus if you simply have some Q&A type questions. I think if you have some product launches where a lot of what users are asking about are just questions about how the feature works or how they can sign up, I think those are areas which most teams start in, but then as they build out more complex features and more complex product sets, that's where I think Decagon can come in.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense, right? The question is, if we have limited resources internally, which of these problems do we want to spend our time fixing, right? The benefit, of course, of our partnership and really what we're building is, having done this dozens of times over at this point, I feel relatively confident regardless of the type of organization I'm going to talk to. I have a pretty good sense of what it's going to take to build an AI agent, right? And so obviously not reinventing the wheel, and then being able to get some of those extra functionalities like you were talking about, experimentation, automated QA through our Watchtower product, feels like it's a really compelling point to folks who maybe are saying, I only can invest so much. How do I make sure I'm investing in the right things? Cool. Awesome. Bihan, appreciate the time. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Max.